I always thought betrayal only came from enemies. Turns out, sometimes it comes from the people you trust with your life. My story starts in a small town, where I grew up with a guy named Ryan. He wasn't just my best friend, he was more like my brother. We did everything together, skipped classes, played ball in the rain, even dreamed about moving to the city to make something of ourselves. Ryan wasn't the type of guy you'd ever think twice about trusting. He was loyal, funny, and always had my back in fights. But sometimes, people wear masks so good you can't see the cracks until it's too late. It all changed the night he introduced me to his cousin, Mark. Mark was smooth, too smooth. He talked about business, fast money, and investments. Ryan vouched for him, saying, "Bro, this is the move we've been waiting for." I should be walked away right there. But I didn't, because it wasn't just Mark convincing me, it was Ryan, the guy who'd been by my side for over a decade. So, when they pitched me on putting in money for a sure deal, I trusted them. I pulled every dollar I had saved from working late shifts at the warehouse. Ryan put in his share too, or at least he said he did. Weeks went by, then months, and slowly, the cracks started to show. Mark stopped answering calls. Ryan got vague every time I asked questions. Something inside me told me I was being played, but I didn't want to believe it. Until one night, I saw Ryan at a bar. He didn't see me, but I saw him, with Mark. They were laughing, drinking, celebrating. My money had bought their good time. And in that moment, my world flipped upside down. I didn't confront him that night. I just stood there, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. Ryan, my brother, my closest friend, clinking glasses with the guy who had drained me of everything I had. I walked out before they noticed me, but something inside me broke. The next day, I called Ryan. My voice was steady, but my chest was burning. "Bro, where's our money? Mark's been ghosting me. Tell me what's going on." There was a long pause on the other end. Then he sighed and said, "Relax, man. It's tied up. You gotta trust the process. Trust the process." That's when I knew. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't worried. He was calm. Too calm. Like he already knew the truth but was trying to keep me in the dark. I started digging. I asked around, checked some mutual contacts, and finally got the answer I didn't want. There was never an investment. The business deal was a front. Mark was running scams, and Ryan was right there with him. But what cut the deepest wasn't losing the money. It was realizing Ryan never put in a cent of his own. All his talk about us being in this together. Lies. He had sold me out, and I was the fool who let it happen. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every memory of us as kids, every promise we made, replayed in my head like a cruel joke. I wanted to believe there was some explanation, some reason he'd done it. But there wasn't. It was simple. Money meant more to him than our friendship. One night, I finally snapped. I drove to his apartment, ready to demand answers face to face. And when he opened the door, the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't surprised to see me. He was scared. That fear in his eyes confirmed it all. He didn't even try to play dumb. He just stepped aside, letting me in, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Why, Ryan?" My voice cracked. "Why would you do this to me?" "To Urs." He didn't answer right away. He poured himself a drink, his hand trembling slightly, then finally muttered, "Because I was tired of being broke. Tired of watching everyone else win while we struggled. Mark promised me a way out." I laughed, bitter, hollow. "So you sold me out. You let him drain me while you stood by." He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I didn't recognize him. His eyes weren't the eyes of my brother anymore. They were cold, calculating. "You were just too trusting. I knew you'd buy into it. I knew you'd follow me no matter what." Those words hit harder than losing the money. My own brother admitted he used me, not out of desperation, but because he knew he could. I wanted to hit him, to make him feel just a fraction of the pain he'd caused, but I didn't. Instead, I walked out. My chest was burning, my head spinning, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let this end here. If Ryan thought he could play me, if he thought he could take everything, and walk away clean, he was wrong. I was done being the fool. It was time to make him pay. I didn't sleep that night. Instead I sat on the hood of my car under a street lamp, replaying every lie Ryan had ever told me. The more I thought, the angrier I got. But anger alone wouldn't fix this. I needed a plan. I needed proof that would expose him and Mark in a way that left no room for excuses. First I went through everything we had, contracts, emails, bank transfers. I made copies, screenshots, anything that could show a paper trail. I opened a burner email, created a fake lead, and reached out to a supplier Mark supposedly used. It took patience and a few small lies of my own, but I managed to get a name, a meeting time, and a warehouse address that kept popping up in different messages. It was the same kind of place where I seen them laughing with my money in their hands. Next, I called in favors. There aren't many people who'll help you when you say my friend stole my life. But I had one person who still trusted me, Luis, an old coworker who owed me for covering his shift a few months back. I told him the bare minimum, no melodrama, just facts. He didn't ask questions, he said. I'll be there. That's the kind of person I needed. Someone steady. Someone who wouldn't flinch when things got messy. We set up a small surveillance plan. I hid a couple of rented trail cameras around the warehouse entrance, left my recorder on my jacket when I slipped inside, and made sure Luis had eyes on the back alley. I didn't trust technology alone, though. I needed to catch Ryan in the act, talking numbers, handing off cash, boasting about how he'd played me. The more I imagined his face when confronted with irrefutable proof, the less sleep I needed. 2 nights later Ryan showed up. He walked in like he owned the place, laughing, clapping Mark on the shoulder. They moved into the back room, where the deals happened. I stayed in the shadows, phone recording, breath barely audible. My hands were steady now, not from calm, but from resolve. I listened as they counted money, discussed front companies, and planned their next target. Ryan even joked about how easy it was to make someone believe. My blood ran cold. When they left, I followed at a distance up close. Ryan's arrogance was almost cinematic, too confident, too sure. But as we reached an intersection, he pulled his phone out. I caught one glance at the screen, a text thread with Mark, timestamps, and an address that matched one of the supplier leads I'd dug up. Perfect. I sent everything to Luis, and then, in a move that felt both reckless and necessary, I uploaded the recordings to a secure cloud folder, and managed the link to the journalist contact I'd made months earlier, the one who'd been quietly asking about scams in our area. I typed a short line: if this isn't real, I'll regret it. If it is, publish it. Then I walked away. My heart hammered so loud I thought it would betray me. Ryan and Mark could still be untouchable. They could still slip the net. Or they could panic and come for me first. Either way, there was no turning back. The next morning, my inbox exploded. The journalist had published the story, the recordings, the bank trails, the photos from the surveillance cams. The piece read like a slow, hard punch. Names, dates, evidence. Comments flooded in, and people I barely knew managed to say they were sorry, that they had no idea. My phone felt like it might melt from the heat. I drove to the warehouse before the sun finished climbing, not because I expected anything dramatic, but because I needed to see the place one last time. The gate was chained and an unmarked detective's car sat at the curb. 2 officers were taking statements from a woman who worked at a nearby business. She nodded when she saw me, recognition and relief mixed on her face. Inside, the place was a mess, piles of boxes, a Western-style ledger with entries crossed out, and the smell of stale smoke. Evidence tags fluttered from crates. They arrested Mark first. I watched him get led out in handcuffs, his bravado gone, mouth opening and closing like a fish. Then they asked about Ryan. He wasn't on the property. For a moment, I felt a flicker of anger. He'd probably run. I wanted to find him, to make him look me in the eye, and say what he'd said in person, that I was too soft, that I was naive. I wanted him to watch his lies fall apart. 2 days later, Ryan turned himself in. The look on his face when the detective put him in the interview room was different than anything I'd seen. No smirk, no defiance, just an old man behind eyes that suddenly looked too tired for his age. He confessed, partly out of pressure, partly because the evidence didn't leave room for speech. I watched the footage again in court, his voice, captured on my recorder, admitting things I didn't want to hear. He pled guilty to fraud and several conspiracy charges. Seeing him process through the system hurt in a way I couldn't have expected. There was justice, legal, precise, and cold, but there was also the slow, aching grief of losing someone who had been a part of my life since we were kids. People asked how I felt about forgiveness. I didn't have an answer ready. Forgiveness felt like a big, distant thing. Accountability was immediate. He'd stolen my money, my trust, the plans we'd made. Consequences were necessary. In the months that followed, I rebuilt. It wasn't glamorous. I took one small job after another, rebuilt relationships that had frayed under the strain, and found ways to make the debt manageable. The business was gone, but the lessons stayed with me. Document, verify, don't mix blind trust with finances. I learned to listen to my gut, and to ask hard questions early. I also learned that people change, or reveal themselves, and you can't force them back into who they used to be. Ryan called once from a holding facility months later. His voice was small when he said, "I'm sorry." I sat on my porch, and listened to him stumble through apologies that sounded both sincere and too late. I asked him one question instead. Did you ever think about how we'd feel? He had no answer. There's a kind of freedom that comes after you survive betrayal. It isn't the absence of pain, it's the clarity of knowing you can stand up again. I still remember the sting, the sleepless nights, the way every face in a crowd looked like it might belong to another liar. But I also remember the people who didn't walk away, the ones who helped me gather proof, the stranger at the diner who gave me a nod, the reporter who risked his story. Trust can be rebuilt in small pieces. Today I'm careful, not cynical. I value honesty loud enough to hear it. And when I see kids on the corner playing like we used to, carefree, believing the world is theirs, I tell myself that part of what I lost was the illusion that everyone keeps their promises. What I gained was a sharper sense of who I am, a man who survived, learned, and moved forward.